Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts May Vary. We have a good one in store for you today.
The quietest we've ever been because we were just in awe of Johanna's amazingness. Let me just tell people who Johanna is. Johanna Kandel and I met in kind of the height of the pandemic in 2020. And she is the founder of the National Alliance for Eating Disorders. And ever since that initial conversation with her, I was just so in awe of her presence and her lived experience and the way she imbues that into her work and how many people she helps today. We knew we had to bring her on the podcast. So Johanna had a decades-long battle with an eating disorder herself. And from her place of recovery, ended up founding the Alliance in October of the year 2000. The National Alliance for Eating Disorders is the leading national nonprofit organization, and they provide referrals, education, and support to individuals experiencing eating disorders as well as their loved ones. And so they offer different things like educational tools and weekly led support groups. And they have an amazing national helpline that's actually run by clinicians and not volunteers, which is super unique and beautiful. Johanna actually goes into detail about everything the Alliance has to offer at the end of this episode, so make sure to check out the links below or stay tuned to hear more about them. They are just such an incredible resource and, quite frankly, one of my favorite Instagram follows.
Truly, which you made sure to mention at the end too.
Yes, I did.
This is definitely, listen, you should be listening through and through to all of our episodes, but I will say that this episode is definitely one where you don't want to miss anything that Johanna has to say.
Absolutely.
It's estimated that 29 million Americans will experience an eating disorder at some point during their lifetime, with somebody dying every 52 minutes as a direct result. And yet only about a third of individuals experiencing eating disorders will ever receive treatment. This was a conversation that was so at the forefront of Meadow and I's mind since we started this podcast. Johanna has been our number one. We need her on from the very beginning. So we knew this was going to be an important conversation. And we talked about literally everything and still have so much more. She's going to come back on. But
she's coming back.
To give you a little sneak peek of what we're talking about today, Johanna shared with us her story and why she started the Alliance and everything that the Alliance has to offer. We spoke about the genetic link to eating disorders, the power of a diagnosis, when and how to ask for help, the catch-22 that is social media. Yes, we talk about Ozempic. Okay. She helped explain and understand a helpful peer support model.
Yes.
We also revisited the conversation that Meadow and I have a ton on the podcast of the idea of change. And we got her thoughts on leading a healthy lifestyle versus falling back into your disorder, and her advice to understand the why behind your actions that can be helpful. We also talk a lot about accountability, the power of forgiveness. And we wrap up talking about early intervention and what we can do if we see a loved one struggling. There's 10 out of 10.
There's really so much in this. Like every answer she gives is so thoughtful, so much from the heart. There's so much tangible tools and resources and information, and just quite frankly, one of my favorite episodes we've done.
Me too. I learned so much. I'm so grateful to Johanna for her vulnerability, her thoughtfulness, and just everything she does. I think you guys will really enjoy it. So here's our conversation with Johanna.
Take it away.
Oh no, we seem good to go. Okay, we seem ready.
We're rolling now.
Awesome.
Yay. Johanna, I was telling you earlier that we literally start the majority of our episodes. Like Meadow and I will just be having a conversation, and then I'll just like the little red button, and then all of a sudden like the beginning starts.
I love it. I mean, that's how like I want to listen to my podcast, right? Like this uber like produce stuff. I'm like, fantastic, but give me real, give me life. So I love everything about that.
Oh my gosh. We're so happy you're here. So happy you're here.
So happy.
We also were telling Johanna before we started recording, we have been manifesting this, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, for like a year. So it's kindred spirits are aligning today.
Yes. I love that. And I'm so damn happy to be here.
Yay.
Thank
you.
Johanna, we start all of our episodes by asking our guests to tell us what they're currently unpacking. It can be anything. You can go big, you can go small. However you feel, however that resonates.
So not to start off this podcast on this note, but I lost my father several weeks ago. So so I think that that's currently what I am, really working my way through. So on a personal note, that's what I'm working on. And I think on like a professional note, what I'm unpacking is just the disappointment in the politics within communities, not like politics like we talk about DC, but just like intra-community politics. And there not being space for all individuals to have a seat at that proverbial table and not all voices being heard. So there's a lot going on in my therapy sessions right now.
I lost my dad when I was 17. So my heart is overflowing with love for you right now.
You, Meadow. I really appreciate
I know that
that
feeling well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know this and have experienced this, but my big thing that I always say to people with grief is that time doesn't heal all wounds. It just creates the space for you to add more love around the grief.
Yeah.
That's all it does.
I saw this amazing image, and I'm sure everyone has seen some version of this, of like, you know, this glass canister and a very big ball. And it, like, at the beginning, it feels like the ball is hitting all sides of the canister, and just over time, the ball of grief stays the same, but the canister just gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
So it's that same thing. And, you know, it's a really interesting time in my life as well. You know, and I'm so grateful for so many tools that I learned on my journey to recovery. But I find myself in this sandwich generation that is a very odd place to be, where I'm taking care of my mom and also taking care of my child. So it's just like in between. And also remembering that, you know, there has to be space for me too, which was not always how it was. And, you know, some of the amazing tools that I learned through my journey was I can't really take care of everyone else if I don't stop to fill up my own cup and put on my proverbial oxygen mask. So I know that putting it into practice a little bit harder, but, you know, I am a very messy work in progress, and so damn happy to be able to show up in conversations like this as myself. So.
And we appreciate you doing it.
I know. Seriously. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to hear more about those tools that you learned during your recovery that can help years later through a situation that might have had seemingly nothing to do with what that recovery was for in the first place.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like the biggest misconception is, or that I had, not the biggest, one of the misconceptions. There were a lot, but I wasn't just recovering from my eating disorder. I was recovering to live my life. And so many of the tools that I learned through the journey of recovery are things that I needed, that I really wanted and really had to have in order to live my life. And so it wasn't just recovering from an eating disorder. It was, you know, allowing myself to take up space, allowing myself to use my voice, also allowing myself to have boundaries and saying no, and saying, you know, I have to show up too. I have to be on top of that list of like the 100 things that I have to do. Like if I'm 101 on that list, I will never get to myself. And so, you know, I think that so much of what I learned throughout my treatment and throughout my recovery was just that I and all of us that experience eating disorders, and even those of us who don't, like, deserve to take up space, deserve to be seen and heard and valued.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into that story a little bit, because I remember the first time speaking with you, which must have been what, 2020?
I think so. Yeah, it was at the height.
Like
I think it was right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Pandemic. I think so too. I remember just really connecting with your story too, because we both grew up as dancers.
Yes.
And that like formative identity and the body dysmorphia and eating that cup, like I remember just feeling so seen by you. So I'd love for you to give background on that story and then how that led into the Alliance.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I always share when I talk about my story is that for me, my story began long before I was around. So my father was a Holocaust survivor. And my mother came from extreme poverty. So, you know, that transgenerational trauma, that epigenetics that happened very much was a big part of, you know, my life growing up. The Holocaust was a part of my life, even though we never talked about it ever. You know, as far as genetics goes, we know that of all the causes that contribute to the development of an eating disorder, about 50 to 80% is genes. And then with the trauma, and so they ran in my family, they still run in my family. And so genetically, I was what you would say screwed. But we all know that the genes don't necessarily mean that it'll happen. It's just, you know, the likelihood. So I had the genetics, I had the characteristics, the temperament, that people pleaser, that perfectionist, that black or white, that all or nothing. that also, you talk about dance, makes you a great dancer, great athlete,
Oh, yeah.
Great scholar.
Right.
When I started walking, I walked with my feet turned in. So my parents thought, well, let's put her in ballet to like sort of fix that. And then to their, chagrin, I like saw this professional ballet dancer in a tutu, pink tights and point shoes and was like, that's what I want more than anything. I mean, it was like a real life fairy princess at the time. I think I was 3 or 4 at the time. And, I was given the gift of dance. And from the age of 10, I danced at pretty prestigious academies and schools around the country. And at my ballet studio, there was a lot of pressure of, you're going to be the one that takes us all the way. And I remember it was the summer before 7th grade. I was around 11 and a half, 12. And the artistic director of the professional company came into our ballet class and said, we're doing a brand new production of the Nutcracker. We want you all to audition to dance in the corps de ballet. But before you do that, we need you all to lose weight. And it was a very blanket statement. And I was a lot younger than the majority of the females in the class. And I took it as a directive, like, you win at all costs. It doesn't matter what you do, but you figure it out. And this was the late 80s. I'm totally dating myself. I'm 44. I have the gray hairs and the wrinkles to prove it. But at that time, everything was fat free. That was the craze. Like, it wasn't before the no carbs or the whatever, the shit that's going on
whatever
right
trend.
now.
Yeah.
So, I remember telling my mom when I got into the car that night is, I'm going to go on a healthy food diet. And that was just really what I was going to do. And, having a child now that eats all the beige, literally she eats just beige, that, when your child says, I want to eat fruits and vegetables, like, of course. And I have to share with the both of you that I didn't look out the window that day and said, it's a beautiful day in sunny West Palm Beach, Florida. I think I'm going to have an eating disorder today. But I think I shared this last time we talked. It's like, it was the epitome of the path to hell is filled with good intentions. Like, I wanted to better myself. So I started eating healthier and more restrictive and exercising more. And we auditioned, and much to my dismay, I was the only one out of a group of 15 girls that didn't get cast. And they pulled me aside and they said, Johanna, the reason why you didn't get the part is not because you're not a good dancer. On the contrary, because you look so young. We can't put you up there next to these professional adults. And that was my first encounter with that really bad game of telephone that individuals with eating disorders will have, where someone will say something and then what you hear is totally different. What I heard was, you didn't get the part because you are too large. And that's really what I heard. And I made this commitment to myself that next year I would do whatever it takes to get the part. And again, I just want to clarify, I did not say I'm going to start acting out an eating disorder symptomatology. That was never my thing. And that's really where my eating disorder began, where I started to restrict more, exercise more. And before I knew it, I was engaging in anorexia nervosa. And my story continues for the next decade, where I experienced, low weight anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, atypical anorexia nervosa, binge eating disorder. And the thing that was pretty phenomenal for me is that there were definitely times in my story where early intervention should have happened. Because at that time, I was that archaic stereotype of who develops eating disorders and what they look like. I was that Lifetime after school television movie that people were watching. And there were a lot of times in my struggle where I wasn't, where I lived life in a much higher weight body. And it didn't matter where I was in context to weight. There was zero intervention. When I lived life in a higher weight body, there was all talk about, you should probably lose weight, even though they sort of knew about my history. And I had no access to care. And it really wasn't until I had ultimately had to stop dancing because, my doctor and my mom, they really didn't understand the eating disorder, but they also knew that if I continued dancing, it would probably end up killing me, because they thought if I didn't dance, then I wouldn't have an eating disorder, like, very simply. And, naive me was like, if I don't have to wear pink tights and a black leotard every day, I don't have to be concerned. So I stopped dancing, and that is really where my depression really kicked in. My anxiety kicked in. And unfortunately, I had some suicide attempts during that time as well, because I had lost the one true identity that I had for so long. And I didn't know who I was outside of my eating disorder. That ultimately led me to find my way to what I do now, meaning that beyond my identity of just being a human that danced and a human that experienced an eating disorder, I also someone who lived my life with an eating disorder and knew that if there was any way that I could recover, I would pay it back and move it forward. I wish I could tell you that the journey to recovery was just like a switch. I didn't get access to care because at that time I was living life in a larger body. Insurance wouldn't pay for it. My family did not have the resources. And so for a lot of my recovery, I went to free support groups, like AA meetings. Even though alcohol was never my thing, I wanted to be in a space where people spoke very similar language to what I was going through. And ultimately I found care through a community mental health clinic, and I started to recover. That is really when I had thought I wanted to be a psychologist that specialized in the treatment of eating disorders. But I realized that to me, I had to go back to that 7th grade version of me that felt like I didn't deserve to take up space. And so I called my parents up and I said, so, the whole grad school thing, not going to do it for now. So I deferred grad school for a year. I took out a student loan and I used that to start the Alliance. And then I moved home to West Palm. And that was at the end of 2000. And, 22 years later, here I am. So yeah, that's a long version of a story.
No, but a beautiful story, and a story that I'm sure so many people can relate to. I mean, there's so many touch points that I want to go back to in what you shared. And thank you for sharing that with us. But just from like the beginning of what you were explaining of, you don't just wake up and decide this is what you're going to do. And I love that you brought up the genetic piece of it as well, because Meadow and I were talking about that prior to recording when we were, going over all of the things we wanted to chat with you about. And I was like, it's so interesting that there is that genetic link that I was not aware of, that I never really paid attention to. There must be such power in understanding, because I feel like so many of us that have experienced an eating disorder, disordered eating in some way, a lot of it like links back to control. And knowing that there was a part of us that was predisposed in a way is very freeing.
So much. I'm so happy that you said that, because for so long, the bricks that I carried in that proverbial backpack of the shame with the eating disorder. I can't believe I chose to do this. I can't believe I caused myself and my family and my loved ones so much pain and sadness and fear. And I literally, my eating disorder almost ripped my family apart. And it was actually significantly in my recovery that the first studies were coming out. Dr. Cindy Bulick's studies were coming out on the genetics of eating disorders. And I found myself exhaling for the first time. And we say that all the time in our support groups that we hold, is that we didn't choose to have eating disorders, just like someone doesn't choose to have diabetes or cancer. There is a much bigger force out there. Eating disorders, not only do they not discriminate on who they affect, right? They don't discriminate between age, gender, race, class, sexual orientation, body shape and size, ability, neurodiversity, but they also are not a disorder of choice. That tends to be a game changer for a lot of people. And I'm not saying that it's, the genetics are there, so therefore white flag, let me experience it. But it's when you're walking through it, it also gives you that idea of, well, if you have a trip and a fall, which inevitably you're going to on the journey to recovery, let's take a beat when the shame rolls in and think, if someone was recovering from cancer hypothetically and they had like a relapse and needed more chemo or radiation, it would not be, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm not strong enough, have enough willpower, that this was something that I did. It was, this is the disease. And that's exactly what eating disorders are. It's mental health, and mental health, physical health. It's all health and needs to be treated on par and on the same playing field.
Yeah.
It speaks so much to your wisdom that you went to AA, because even as you're describing all that, it feels very similar to how we treat addiction. Like,
Totally,
it's your choice, stop using drugs, which is absolutely what we know now is not true. It's also interesting though, because it's like, at least in my head, it feels like this catch-22 of, it wasn't my choice. There's circumstances out of my control, and that's freeing. But then also, like, I still have to control what behaviors or actions I take in order to choose healing and choose treatment.
Yes.
So I guess I'm just kind of curious how, like, where that line was for you and in general for other people, like when is the time for treatment versus like if you don't have access to resources, what can you kind of do on your own to empower that and not fall into that control that we know is so wrapped up with eating disorders?
You know, I think you just said it so beautifully, is we definitely have to hold space for the fact that only 30% of individuals with eating disorders will ever have access to care. You know, so a large percentage of folks that will experience this will never be able to access care because of the prohibitive cost, because of managed care, scarcity of mental health services.
Stigma.
So much stigma, you know, because again, to this day, even though we just talked about the fact that eating disorders do not discriminate, when you say eating disorders, you have a vision in your head of who it is, you know? And I mean, so at the beginning of the pandemic, from a Friday to a Monday, we had to totally flip from our in-person brick and mortar support groups to our virtual platforms. And it has been such a beautiful silver lining to a really shitty time in all of our lives, right?
Yeah.
And there is an amazing group member, male identifying dad figure, if you will, lives life in a much higher weight body, who literally said it. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it ties into what you're saying. He's like, I would have never, ever walked into an eating disorder support group if I had to physically walk in. But the fact that I can hop online and I can get the support, get the love, it makes it okay. And that human not only has been joining our support groups, but then actually with our help connected to a higher level of care, has a therapist, has a dietitian, is on the road to recovery. And I will tell you, had it not been for these virtual services where he literally didn't have to walk into a space of, let's be real, probably all female identifying, probably all Caucasian, probably primarily very small bodied, that it makes you othered, and it makes you othered in a space that you're already othered. And, you know, going back to the first part of your question is like, when do you know, like when to be like, I need help? And the truth of it for me personally is I came to a point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that, you know, I don't want to say that was my rock bottom because, you know, for me, like I just kept on digging, very honestly. Like I don't think there was a rock bottom for me. But I had this moment in my experience with my eating disorder where the fear of change, because again, you talk about that control is like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Yes.
Was a little bit less than a desire to just maybe crack the door and just peek out to see what life was beyond my eating disorder. Because even though my eating disorder was that maladaptive coping mechanism that kept me afloat, it was also still drowning me. And I knew that it was going to end me. And I wanted to show up. I wanted to live. And as scary as it was, I had this fleeting moment of, let me just see. And of course, I was like, after that, I was like, oh, hell no, I don't want to do this. And it was this beautiful mess of one step forward and 3 steps back and 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I think that that's not something that people talk about a lot because we're so black or white, because we have such a binary way of thinking. It's, I'm going to be in recovery or I'm going to be in my eating disorder. And when you come to this concept of food, which you need to live, it cannot be an abstinence-based recovery because you need to engage with it every single day of your life. And so it's this idea that you will trip and fall, but it's not about the trips and the falls. It's about what happens in that moment after. And it's not just about getting up. It's realizing that you deserve, in fact, you need that extending hand to help you stand up. Because I will tell you, there was a lot of times where even if I wanted to stand up, I couldn't. And I needed help and support to do that.
So I was just thinking about this when Meadow asked that question about when is it time to ask for help or seek help. I know that in my personal experience, it was very much like well, we're all doing it. It's not that big of a deal type of thing. And I think that led to, I don't want to speak for like other people in my life, but that led to me never seeking help, seeking any treatment, seeking any diagnosis, never really addressing it until I was much later in life. What I guess is like a piece of advice for people who are like, well, it's not that deep. Like I can stop. It's like, it's not that serious yet, or like, it's not going to get that serious. Like, what is the line of like needs treatment? Is there something else we can be doing in the meantime?
I really appreciate that question, and I think my surface answer is when you can no longer do life, when your eating disorder is at the driver's seat and navigating every part of your life. What I will tell you is that's really like the sneakiness of the disease of the eating disorder is that it will tell you that you're never quote unquote sick enough, no matter where you are. And, I think that's one of the big misnomers of like, oh, well, I'm not quote unquote thin enough. I'm not dysregulated enough. I'm not depressed enough. I'm not anxious enough. I can still do life. And, one of the cornerstones of eating disorders, specifically when it comes to anorexia nervosa, for example, is this concept of anosognosia, of lack of insight, is where you think you are fine. I will tell you, when I was experiencing my eating disorder, I thought I was fine. I really wasn't. And I think that we live in a world that normalizes eating disorder behaviors.
Oh,
it's very weight stigmatized. It's very fat phobic. I literally, if I hear one more thing about Ozempic being used, I'm going to lose my mind.
We wrote this down.
Gabby was dying to talk to you about this.
Oh Lord, like that's another podcast on its own.
Yes.
But and then you turn around, and I don't know if you all have talked about this yet, the bullshit AAP guidelines, the American Academy for Pediatric Guidelines, that say now that you can tell kids as young as 3 years old to go on diets, or that you can tell kids.
Alliance post about it.
About 12-year-olds that it's okay to get their bodies mutilated and get gastric bypass. No, period. No, and so I think because of all of that, we've in turn normalized eating disorder behaviors or disordered eating behaviors. And it's exactly like what you said, Gabby, of well, everyone else is doing it. It can't be that bad. Well, yeah, it is. And I mean, there's a reason why eating disorders have the second highest lethality rate of all psychiatric disorders, with someone losing their life every 52 minutes. And so I think it's also realizing that you don't have to live that way. And I will tell you, we have a long way to go. And I think, you go back to what you originally asked me about unpacking, that's some of the stuff I'm unpacking. And so many of the folks around me are unpacking.
Yeah. And that's so validating hearing you say that too, because similar to Gabby, I feel like I had an experience in college where, looking back now with hindsight, I'm like, oh, I had orthorexia. But then I would have never, it was like I looked the best I had ever looked. So many people are complimenting you and validating you, like, oh, you're in your early 20s. You're finding your body. But only I knew how obsessive my thoughts were, how I scheduled with where I was going to eat that day. You only can know that for yourself. But so getting into more of the weeds, I've heard you speak before about dieting in general, but also intuitive eating and the fad that is intuitive eating, and how that maybe is not so helpful for people that have kind of disordered eating patterns in the past. So I kind of want all of your thoughts around not following into a slippery slope. If you don't have access to care, what are some ways you can start to help yourself in terms of a healthier relationship with food?
Yeah, I mean, I am number one fan of intuitive eating if you are at a place where you can practice intuitive eating. And in fact, I have to share this with you because I nearly crashed my car yesterday. I have a 6-year-old amazing human for a child. Literally, I'm so not a kid person, but I love my child so much. I'm so that person. Be like, you really want to see a picture of my kid, right? We, of course, ever since we would read stories, all of that. It's your body's amazing. Her first book that she was supposed to read in kindergarten last year was Good Food versus Bad Food, which I literally almost I lost my shit on the teacher. I'm we don't believe that stuff. She tells me in the car yesterday, because she is, again, all the beige, loves Uncrustables. And so,
that was my favorite when I was little.
She says to me,
"You're the best.
Do you know how many calories are in an Uncrustable?" And I was like, oh, for the love of everything. So I pull over my car because I'm like, we're going to be late for school because we are going to have this conversation. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And she said, oh, my friend, insert her name, told me about calories and how an Uncrustable has a certain amount of calories. And I was like, do you know what calories are? And she's like, nope, have no idea. And I was like, well, they're units of energy that we take in order to be able to do karate and to dance and to sing and to sit and to, sleep. And I said to her, I'm like, baby, you have to remember that, our bodies, if we actually listen to them, they tell us when we're hungry. And they also tell us when we're full. But because we live in the world that we live in, sometimes we're not able to connect to that. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you listen to your body? I said, what do you do when you're hungry? And she's like, I eat. And I'm like, and what do you do when you're full? She's like, I stop. And I said, okay, that to me is the most basic intuitive eating. But when you're struggling with an eating disorder, let's be real, you have a complete disengagement between your hunger, satiety, and anything physical. And so when you are struggling with an eating disorder, whether it is orthorexia, binge eating disorder, ARFID, whatever it is, you might not be able to start with intuitive eating when you're when you just are starting your recovery journey, because you're literally not going to be intuitive at all, because the eating disorder is going to be front and center. And so for me, I couldn't do intuitive eating. Well, it wasn't even a thing back then, but I couldn't do intuitive eating. I had to do very mechanical eating at the time because I didn't know when I was hungry. I also didn't, I was full all the time. Like in my head told me I was full. Yeah. And so I had to start mechanical eating at the time. And then once I was able to be at a certain place, that's when the intuitive eating came in. And that's when I could sort of do what I told my 6-year-old is, eat when I'm hungry and stop when I'm full. And I also want to hold space for the fact that there's a lot of people out there that will never get that access. And so if that's where you find yourself, please join one of our free therapist-led support groups. Our groups are not in lieu of individual care, but we have 6 different groups a week. We have about 22 support groups in person across the country, and we're adding a ton more in the near future. Start somewhere, because you don't have to walk this journey alone.
I would love to get your thoughts on social media, because we talk a lot about particularly TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is, on the one hand, such power and beauty in knowing you're not alone, in knowing that somebody else is going through something similar. And at the same time, there's also this danger and fear around self-diagnosis, around the concept of like egging each other on, a lot of body checking. I know that I have heard stigma and backlash against peer support models and the danger within that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on just all of the above.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about is something that I find myself in a lot. This idea that you can feel more than one thing at one time. Thank you so much for that Disney movie or Pixar. I think it was Inside Out, where it was like, you cannot just only feel one feeling. Yeah. So yes, we can hold both, right? We can hold that dialectic of, social media, all of them were actually incredible, especially like during the pandemic, of this idea that you're not alone, that, you have folks that lived experience or shared journeys, and you can be seen and you can feel like not othered in certain situations. So I want to definitely say, yay, go them for that. Then on the flip side, I agree with you, is I love the idea of peer modeling. In fact, I think that's very much the future, because we know that we have a lack of providers and clinicians. So we know that when you have someone who share that lived experience, there's that extra layer of safety and of knowing. And when it comes to eating disorders, you have to be really effing careful, because then it can become very competitive. And that's when you can find yourself more in that like pro eating disorder space, which, oh my gosh, like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of those, they have sections that are just, they blow your mind, showing you how to become better at your disease, or like sort of this idea of like, you don't know what you don't know, but then finding out what you don't know. And then, I could do this, or there's this challenge, or like going back to the conversation of Ozempic, like, it got legs on social media. Like it really did. And now let me tell you, my friends that have diabetes cannot get their Ozempic for life. Like, let's just hold that space out there. But again, I think that we know the effects of social media. We have, the Facebook files, we have research that has come out. And I also, just because this is who I am, I also want to say, yay, they do a lot of good, and stop doing harm. And I don't know if they're going to be able to stop doing all harm, because when you get folks on that, like in a space where they're able to do that, but do a better job, watch these algorithms, There's an amazing piece of legislation called COSA, which is the Kids Online Safety Act, where we're just asking for a little bit of regulation around it to take a look at these algorithms, because when social platforms are making hundreds of millions of dollars on pro eating disorder sites, there's something really effed up about that. And so for me, I think there's such beauty in walking this journey with someone that has a like experience, but just be very cautious on who you align yourself with or who you follow. That's when I share with people all the time is if you're following someone, if you're watching someone's TikTok and it feels bad, you have every right to unfollow, mute, block, do any of those things, because let me tell you, like, it can absolutely exacerbate, the development of eating disorders, the intensity, the acuity of eating disorders. And let's be real, social media is not going away, but we have to figure out a way for it to be safer for everyone.
So I have somewhat of a self-serving question, but also I think just for people in general that want to be able to connect over their eating disorder and body image issues and kind of feel seen, but also know like what's harmful and what's helpful. Or do you have certain tips like, don't share fear foods or like, do's and don'ts to healthfully have these conversations?
Yes. So Eating Disorders Awareness Week is February 27th through March 5th, for example. The number one thing that I see every Eating Disorders Awareness Week is before and after pictures, which again,
oh my gosh,
from a really great place, really terrible, like really, really, really terrible. Because number one is we're saying that eating disorders have a look, which number one, they don't. It doesn't matter what shape or size body, you could be dying from your eating disorder. And let's start to eradicate the dangerous stereotype that, they come in one size, which only 6% of all individuals that are experiencing eating disorders are medically underweight. So that just gives you perspective.
Wow.
But two, it really fuels that competitiveness, that triggering in a sense. So I would say ban the before and after, like, please do that. Be very cautious on specifics. Like, for example, in our support groups, some people come to our groups and they're like, I don't understand how this is an eating disorder support group, but we have rules of no specific talks of weight, of medication, of numbers. And we even say please do not share how long you've had your eating disorder for. And we're not trying to take away your experience. On the contrary, but inevitably there's that competitiveness that comes in of almost, very similarly to Gabby, what you talked about. It's like, oh, it's not that bad. Like when you compare yourself to, well, I didn't weigh that, or I didn't have my eating disorder for that long, or I didn't engage in this behavior. And that is taken away from your experience. And so I sort of blanket, like, avoid specifics, avoid specific eating disorder symptomatology, because all of that is just the tip of the iceberg. The eating disorder is just the tip of the iceberg. The eating disorder is about so much more. It's about the anxiety. It's about the depression. It's about the trauma. It's about the co-occurrent, perhaps personality disorders. It's about all of that. And it's not just about the food. It can be about it. I want to hold that, but it's absolutely not at all just about that.
A conversation that we have a lot on the podcast that I know a lot of our listeners resonate with from just the messages we've gotten prior is the idea that change is inevitable, especially when it comes to our bodies. And especially as people who are able to give birth and bear children, like, our bodies are going to continue to change, and that's an inevitable thing. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the idea of, I guess to put it into context, for example, I had shared a little bit about sort of my journey, and I have PCOS, which, a lot of doctors and my gynecologist, who's wonderful, has really recommended specific things around certain foods just because of the insulin resistance that comes with that. That was very difficult for me to wrap my mind around. And at first I was really resistant to the idea because I was textbook dieter. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do any of that because that's a diet. And then I'm going to go back into like hating myself and all these other things that are going to come with it. But then I look to my health and I'm like, no, but like there are certain things that I do need to be doing just for my health in general. So I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit of the idea of, I know Meadow mentioned it earlier, but like that slippery slope that comes with wanting to live a healthy lifestyle versus when we can spot, when we're over exercising and controlling our eating or overeating. Yeah, I guess there's a
toxic
very
behaviors.
Yeah, there's a very fine line. there.
I love that you brought this up. And I think it all comes down to intention, right? Is what is the intention behind it, and that was really something that I had to learn through my relationship with exercise, because that was one of my things, being a ballet dancer and then, being ridiculous in the fitness world after I stopped dancing, asking yourself the why before you engage it in movement or eating a certain way. Something that we see a lot is, obviously the correlation between PCOS and eating disorders. There's a huge correlation between it, but also chronic illness and eating disorders. And in fact, that's actually one of the groups that we're doing during our Not One More support group marathon, our day of support, is this idea of chronic illness and eating disorders, because there's going to be some truths, right? There are going to be, in that situation, maybe some foods that are maybe more egosyntonic that work better for you. And it's not eating disordered. It's just health-based, right? Mm-hmm. I think number one is examining the source of why you are doing this. And number two, and I cannot say this enough, is accountability. I will tell you that I believe that I have remained in recovery or recovered or whatever word you connect with because of my willingness to be accountable. And I will tell you, as someone who literally is the face of a national organization, that I talk about the fact that I've been in recovery for over 2 decades, it can be very humbling. And with all of that said, is I can only stay as in recovery as I am accountable. And that doesn't mean that I'm struggling. It means that when I'm stressed, because for me, it's not so much a trigger for my eating disorder, but it's also a trigger of when I'm stressed, my appetite goes down. It just does naturally. And having someone in your corner saying, have you had lunch? So it's really examining that, being accountable, examining the source. I have a very dear friend of mine who recovered from her eating disorder and then developed mast cell activation syndrome and has to eat a certain way in order to stay healthy. And she's like, I can't believe I worked tooth and nail for so long to recover, to only have to go to this. Was it worth it? And I was like, could you imagine recovering, actually struggling with an eating disorder and dealing with all of this? So my answer is yes, hard yes. You're going to come into roadblocks. You're going to come into detours. And go back to the source. If you're able to lean back into, for example, a dietitian that specializes in eating disorders, bring that into the mix. If you can't, do you have someone that you're accountable for? And again, take a look at the whys, why you are doing it.
That is so helpful.
Similar to an accountability buddy, what are some other tools you learned in recovery that you find yourself using right now, even in grief? Or what's some other favorite self-care tools that you use?
Definitely, I think reaching out for help, which is very hard. I will say that I was on a phone call yesterday with my executive committee from the board, and I flat out said, I need help. And one of my board members said to me, I've known you for 12 years and I've never heard you utter those words. You seem to always you can tell that the world is on your shoulders, but you're like, it's fine. Everything's good. It's all right. I think knowing that I'm not supposed to know it all, do it all, and to ask for help. I think also remembering that I need to fill up my own cup before I can help others. That's also been a very, very big thing. Accountability in so many shapes and form, for talking about food, for example, but other ways that accountability. And I will say the biggest thing is, even though my mind still tries to convince me that everything needs to be perfect and everything needs to be black or white, that there is the most beautiful rainbow in between those two things, and to lead into that. And even though it's not as I thought it was going to be, being open to the fact that it's going to be the way it was destined to be, and to not judging that.
I love that you keep coming back to help, because I've just been talking with people a lot in my personal life too about the fear of asking for help or being a burden, or somehow you're stronger by doing it alone. And the message at the end of the day, which is similar to you, is if I want to help the most people, and I'm here to go through what I went through in order to help others, how can I help this much or impact the way I want to by myself? You can only do that in community.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I would add, and to be honest, and that is, and vulnerable.
Yeah.
That is so damn hard. Let me tell you, it's so hard. And, I've been definitely leaning into, I adore Glennon Doyle so damn much. And, with her share about her relapse and her work, and she talks a lot about vulnerability and honesty. And it's just, asking for help is probably some of the most vulnerable and most honest. And I think it's time for us to reclaim this idea of asking for help is not a weakness. It's actually a superpower. And it's probably, the hardest thing that you can do. And we were talking about asking for help, and we were talking about fear. And, we were talking about this idea of fear around asking for help. And I asked the group, what is the opposite of fear? A lot of people said fearless. And an amazing member of group said, to me, the opposite of fear is curiosity. And I went, holy shit. Like, it was one of those, like, please hold, I'm writing it down, because I need to tattoo that on me, leaning into the curiosity of what would it look like if I allowed myself the space and the grace to do that.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful because I see your image you said earlier of you peeking beyond the door. Like that curiosity was stronger than the fear that kept you behind it.
Yes.
Even when it was scary afterwards. Like that's so beautiful.
Totally.
Wow.
I feel like that when you were talking about asking for help, which is something again that we talk about all the time here, it to me resonates as the definition of working smarter, not harder.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, totally.
100%. And that is actually my partner's favorite quote in the world. And it makes me crazy all the time. But the way that you just said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. So thank you. Thank you
bring it to him later.
For reframing,
Yes. That's what I'm here for.
And as you said that, the other thing that I thought of when you asked about what are some things, like some tools that you've used. And one of the things is that I think that we only lean into those proverbial tools when the house is on fire. It's like, okay, that break glass in case you need it. It's like, that's the only time. And then I don't know about you all, but for me, I'm like, when I try it, it doesn't work because I'm like, what is this? And I feel so awkward doing this. And I'm like, and it's this idea that you cannot wait for that house to be on fire to start incorporating all of these tools. Like you have to do them when things are going really well and when things are not going well. I will tell you, I have the most incredible rock stars in the world that come, that share space with us on these virtual groups. And I can't say enough about them. They've changed my life. And in 2022 alone, we had more than over 20,000 participants in our group. So it's just folks from all 50 states, 72 countries around the world, the most diverse group of humans you'll ever meet. And this human said, I come to group when things are going well, so I know how to make my way to group when things are not. And to me, I was like, that's what it's about. It's not about waiting until you need it. It's about doing it and making it part of your everyday you so that it feels fine leaning into it when you need it.
Totally. Then you can flex that muscle when you need it because you've been, working. Well, that's I guess exercise is a bad analogy to make.
We get it. It's good. It was really good there.
Thank you.
That's perfect. I feel like a great place for us to wrap up would be, we talked a little bit about early intervention in the beginning and the importance of it. And I would love to hear a bit more about ways in which, if we are worried about somebody in our lives, how to step in without crossing any boundaries or just ways that we can help. And on the flip side, if we are somebody struggling, but similar to your story, the people around us aren't doing anything about it, but see it, what are ways in which we can
reach that hand
do that for ourselves? And reach that hand out.
So if you have a loved one that's experiencing an eating disorder, I would say the first thing would be is to educate yourself on what eating disorders are, what kind of help is available. Be very aware of the information that you are seeking. So I guess bringing it back to that conversation of be very mindful of the information you're looking at. Of course, this is where I come in with my shameless plug about the National Alliance for Eating Disorders.
As you absolutely should.
I'm so, I will tell you, I've been leaning into so much gratitude. I think with so much happening of the amazing humans that make up our team are just the best people I know. And I am so forever humbled and grateful that I get to share space and work with them. They've done such a beautiful job at creating amazing information. So I would say learn first. What I would also do is connect with that person that you're concerned about. Make sure to use I statements. Please don't be accusatory. Don't, and let's not have 75 people around. Let's just have that conversation of, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I've noticed. I'm so sorry that you're going through this. People ask me all the time, what could someone have said to you that would have been a game changer? And I don't know if anything would have been a game changer, very truthfully, but what I really wished someone had said to me is, I am so sorry that this is happening to you. I am so sorry that you're going through this. I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through, but please know that I'm here. I see you. I love you. And I'm here to walk next to you. Even if they're like, which again, my eating disorders are maladaptive coping mechanisms. They're the thing that you hold on to. And even if they're not willing to say, I need help, you've created that dialogue. You've made yourself a safe person. And then continue to follow up with them. Like, I'm here. I love you. Making it a safe space for them to reach out. And if you are struggling with an eating disorder, know that you are not supposed to recover alone. You're not supposed to walk this journey alone. That there are people and places that can walk next to you. We have an amazing helpline here at the organization. It's staffed by all licensed and specialized clinicians. And we don't use volunteers. We use professionals so that we can have really, which is very unique
world. I want to have that be known. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's just that we can have really thoughtful psychoed. We can do, we can assess for safety. We can do all of those things if needed. And we have a huge list of providers all over the country. We can connect you to care from outpatient providers like therapists, dietitians, all the way up to acute medical stabilization, according to your insurance, your location, all of those things. We have these amazing support groups where you don't have to even be an active participant. You can just log on and listen, just to hear, just to be in a space where folks do speak your language. And then, again, know that you're not the exception to the rule, that help is available and that recovery is possible. And that the journey to recovery is not going to be sunshine, bunnies and rainbows, because you don't recover to utopia. You recover to life. And it's going to be messy. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be painful. And I will also tell you, if you're listening, that I've never met a single person that has ever lived their life beyond their eating disorder and that turned around and said, well, that sucked. It wasn't worth it. I mean, I am so grateful. I have to share with you that the last few months of my life have been really, really terrible. So much loss. I lost my father-in-law simultaneously. So it's been a lot. And there's those moments where, and I would be very transparent, where I was like, shit, man, I would like to not feel this for a moment. What's my alternative? Acting out my eating disorder. And so after I act out, I come back, and now not only do I still have that loss, but now I've engaged in my eating disorder. It's never going to solve anything. It's going to be a momentary fix, but it's never going to solve anything. So know that, that you're not the exception, and that it really does get better. It really does.
Oh God, that was so beautiful.
I love, you don't recover to utopia, you recover to life.
Yeah.
That was a bar. That is so beautifully said. And that's why you need the community to do it. I think you kind of answered this question just in saying that you can log on and kind of be a more passive participant. But are Alliance support groups open to family and friends?
So we actually have
separate.
So we actually have separate loved ones groups.
Amazing.
And so
Amazing.
We have groups for loved ones, groups for individuals. We have an amazing LGBTQ plus group.
Cool.
And then during our National Day of Support, we have so many groups. Like, my loved one was just diagnosed with an eating disorder. Now what? Like an ED 101.
Cool.
You can find out. But we're only a phone call away. We're only an email away. We're only a DM away. This is why we're here. This is what we do. And we are a nonprofit organization for all humans that are experiencing all types of eating disorders, that live in all types of bodies, because there's not one way that eating disorders show up, and there's not one way that folks deserve treatment, period.
And speaking to the power of social media, y'all's Instagram is so cool. It's beautifully designed, such good information. The graphics that you do, the info that you're giving out, you're one of my favorite follows, truly. especially as a nonprofit. Nonprofits never have good Instagrams.
So
are you kidding me?
I will tell you, big shout out to Year Round. They are the most exceptional branding, social media. Oh my God, follow them. It's Year-Round. It's phenomenal. They are the best. Their team is incredible. But more than anything, they want people to learn. They want people to follow. And I just,
you can feel it.
That's all I will say.
I can feel it. I've watched the growth and the change, and it's beautiful to see.
Thank you. I will definitely let them know.
Johanna, I'm so happy that we did this and that you were here. I appreciate you so much and your openness and how much you're willing to share and educate us. And every time I talk to you,
can we please do this again? Because I feel like there's
so
much to talk about. Like
when I say we cut 2/3 of our questions for you, like it's not an exaggeration.
Yeah. Let's do it again. And then let's just just so we can hang out. And plus we need to hang out offline too. So thank you for holding this space. Thank you for creating a platform for people to feel seen and heard and to feel connected to. And really thank you for holding space for us to have this conversation. Not a lot of people do. And with as many people experiencing eating disorders in this world, I think they deserve for us to do better. And you are making it better. So thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
You make my heart so full.
This was such a beautiful conversation. I mean, we knew going into it that we were just going to be in awe of you. I don't think Meadow and I have ever been so quiet listening to somebody talk.
Seriously.
You just say everything so beautifully and thoughtfully, and you can just tell it's coming from pure, lived experience. And I'm just so grateful for you and everything that you do.
I feel the same way, so thank you.
Yay, and come back.
Love fest.
Yeah. Done.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
How's it going, y'all? It's Aaron. Don't let your Monday suck. Don't have those Sunday scaries. I'm tired of everybody waking up in the week saying, shit, it's Monday. You know what goes down? TMV releases every week on Mondays. Make sure you rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching YouTube, yes, TMV has a YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and ring that noti bell and never miss a thing. And also, join the TMV Familia by joining the Thoughts May Vary Patreon and by following @ThoughtsMayVaryPod on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you for listening.
Great.
There you go.
Thanks, AB.
Got y'all.